Braden Smith, former Greens candidate for Currumbin and South Coast Greens spokesperson, joins me here. Braden, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So the Gold Coast Greens, with the help of other local groups, are running a campaign to convince Gold Coast City Council to freeze for rent. Why do you want to see that?
Well, I think that when you look at the data, it is very clear that there is a problem on the Gold Coast. We have the highest rent increase in all of Queensland, second highest in the entire country. If you break it down, actually by federal electorate, as a lot of your viewers probably know, there are 150 federal electorates in the country. And the South Gold Coast, where I'm currently in right now, McPherson, is number two in the country for rent increases. And we know that that is forcing people out. It's forcing working class people out. It's forcing young people out. It's forcing them into horrible living situations. I've spoken to many people over the course of this campaign. I've spoken to a 18-year-old who had just moved out and was paying $620 a week in Robina for a room and an ensuite. Uh, I spoke to somebody that was, on a unit that they weren't sure were legal and were paying like $750 a week. And this sort of incredible price gouging on rents is really negatively affecting not only the renters, but the entire city. We know that working class people are increasingly being forced to leave. I had a coworker of mine who said that if she got another rent increase, she would be forced to uproot her family and move to Brisbane because there were no affordable houses on the market. And so it really is a necessary measure when you consider that the city fundamentally cannot run without working class people. You can't have a city that is just made up of millionaires. It just doesn't work. You need working class people to actually keep the wheels turning. And another point I would say is young people, especially being forced out. The New South Wales Productivity Commission, a year back, I believe, described Sydney because of high rents as becoming a city with no grandchildren, essentially an entire generation that had left the city. Now, consider the Gold Coast, which has comparable rents to Sydney, um, higher percentage of income spent on rent, and less job opportunities, less educational opportunities, less general cultural sway. When you put all that together, if Sydney's become going to become a city without grandchildren, then the Gold Coast is on a very, very dark path. And so what we're doing is this is an emergency. Now, there are a whole host of policies that the Greens support to solve the housing crisis. But at the very least, there needs to be this emergency measure because currently on the Gold Coast and in Australia, but specifically the Gold Coast as well, we are in a rental crisis and a rental emergency as far as rent increases go.
Now, the Gold Coast is generally considered an LNP stronghold and they dominate politics at all levels of government in the Gold Coast. What's indicated to you that this policy is something Gold Coasters actually support?
Well, I think that one, you can look at the polling on this specific issue. You can find that in some polls, a plurality of LNP voters um, support this policy of a rent freeze. But I can also say, in my personal experience campaigning in for this, trying to gather signatures, I've gotten a lot of people who are conservative, who are, LNP voters, and they see that this unsustainable spate of rent increases aren't in the interests of anybody, no matter your ideology, no matter your political persuasion. You know, a lot of LNP voters care a lot about small businesses. The thing is that Gold Coast small businesses are struggling to hire because of working class people being continually forced out of the city. Um, if you're concerned about the economy, as many LNP voters are, you could see that the exodus of this necessary labor power is harming the Gold Coast economy. And so I think that it's a unifying issue that and a human issue when you see the homelessness, when you see the people forced into these living conditions by being overcharged for massively for rents. it's a human issue. I don't think it's a partisan issue. I think that a lot of people, no matter who they vote for, can get behind it.
Now, housing is mainly the jurisdiction of state governments rather than local governments. What's caused you to pursue a rent freeze at a local level rather than a state level? And how do you actually plan to implement this locally?
Great question. So the state government has already explicitly rejected any form of rent control. We will continue as part of the Green State Party and as part of the Greens Federal Party to call for rent freezes and rent control at any level that they can be implemented. But what we're doing here is making a new rates category through the council that would charge 650% increase in rates to properties where the rent is raised. Now, that is a very simple measure. The council already has over 100 rates categories. It already has categorization officers and means to effectively categorize properties based on certain characteristics. We already categorize things based on whether they're short stay or not, and a whole host of other things. So it is very achievable to add rental increase to the list of characteristics that inform a rates category. And then essentially that extra charge would discourage landlords almost entirely from raising the rent for the next 2 years, as long as it's in place. And that framework can also be used to cap the rent progressively over time. The reason why we're pursuing it at the council level is because the state government has rejected it, and the council has not explicitly rejected it yet. Now, we're aware that that can be an uphill battle, but we have laid out a very pertinent and reasonable and achievable model to enact this. And so we're hoping that the council can take that up and work with that to actually ensure rental affordability on the Gold Coast because this is such an acute area. This is such an acute area. As I discussed at the beginning, we have so many, we are top of the ladder in so many different categories of rental unaffordability. And so if there's anywhere that a local government is going to take specific action, then it should be this one.
Now, you kind of have already talked about this, but currently a majority of Gold Coast City councillors are LNP members, including the incumbent mayor, Tom Tate. Without any local Greens representation, how do you plan to convince the council, who you'd imagine would be hostile to this issue, to implement a rent freeze?
Well, we've been running around basically with a petition before council. We've gotten hundreds of signatures so far. We've gotten almost overwhelming support actually in the people I talk to, especially the renters I talk to about this proposal. And we hope that that outpouring of support will incline the council. Again, I don't think this should be a partisan issue. I don't think that if you're an LNP councillor, you can't back. Uh, now, I'm aware that the LNP is at the state level definitely opposed to this and have taken very conservative and very things that I'm strongly opposed to and the Greens are strongly opposed to. But I don't see why it should stop them from voting for relief for their constituents because even if they are an independent LNP or they're an LNP member, they've run as an independent, they should still be able to see what rent increases are doing to our city and to our renters. And so I would hope that the strong show of support on these signatures, on these petitions, and also we'll be holding a rally on November 21st, actually this Friday, outside or at Carey Park, which is near Councillor Brooke Patterson's office, which is where we'll be presenting the petition. We're going to be hosting that rally as a show of support, outpouring of support, and hopefully the council can see this. They can see that their constituents are demanding this, and hopefully can work with our proposal to try and deliver some relief to renters, no matter which party they have their private affiliation to.
Now, at the moment, this is just a Gold Coast targeted campaign. If the Gold Coast did implement a rent freeze and all went as intended, do you think this campaign could spread to other local governments in Queensland?
Absolutely. I think that, we ran in the Greens ran a campaign at the local level at the last Brisbane City Council election to implement a very similar version of the policy I'm currently proposing. But we could be campaigning on this elsewhere. We could be campaigning on this even in regional areas because regional rent increases are, rental inflation is oftentimes just as bad on a percentage level than the cities. So I definitely do think that this is something that if the Gold Coast were to take it up, it would set a precedent. It would, open the door to winning fights around rental affordability all around Queensland and even all around the country if we got this through.
It's been great talking to you, Braden. Thank you so much for coming on to Six News.
Thanks for having me.